Great. So welcome to this morning's event, although it may not be morning where you are. So this event is part of the Asia Pacific Online Distance Education Week. We've prepared lightning talks with several speakers today on the topic of open education resources. We had about 21 people register, and I'm just still letting people in, and we've got about half of those people here, so we are going to get started. I'd say that's also a pretty good turnout. So our speakers today are Rajna Chand, who's going to speak about OER in the context of the USP and the islands. She'll be followed by Wayne McIntosh, who will talk about building a Pacific Open Platform Cooperative to support the implementation of the UNESCO OER recommendations, followed by Jennifer Hurley, who will be talking about open education in practice, specifically open textbook publishing at RMIT University in Melbourne. So without further ado, we'll get started. The format is that each speaker has as many as 15 minutes. If they speak for 10 minutes, 10 to 12, we'll use the rest of that time for Q&A from the audience, and I'll continue to let people in as they appear in our waiting room. Bear in mind, if you're not muted, you may want to mute yourself, and each speaker will be sharing their own screen for the presentation that they've provided, and you can feel free to use the chat during our presentations to comment on what you're hearing, to chat with another person in the room, or to start your questions there, and we'll pose them at the end of the presentation. So without further ado, I will hand over to Rajna Chand first.
Thank you, Dawn, for giving me the opportunity. And I would like to thank Flens and Orla for inviting me for this session. And I will definitely try to give a bit of a view on what we are doing on OER, ODFL in the region itself. So I'll share my screen now. Can you see my screen at all?
Yes, Rajni, I can see your screen. Thank you.
Okay, so I'm going to take you through what OER in the Pacific and from USP's perspective is. Most of you would know that USP is a regional university which is co-owned by 12 South Pacific countries. All of these countries are interconnected either by wireless or cable, internet and intranet, and that is the way the students and staff communicate and get information regarding everything related to studies at USP. Apart from that, these networks are also useful for having a connection between the South Pacific countries itself, given the fact that not so many other countries have the kind of infrastructure. They depend on USP for providing, apart from just the tertiary education, also the support or training as well as information related to education in the region itself. Let me take you through some of the things that we at USP are currently involved in, as well as I will take you through some of the other projects that are actually actively currently happening in the region, which are related to open education resources itself, or OER. One of the firsts that we have, and this is a collaboration between Commonwealth of Learning and CFL's PACFOLD, which is the Commonwealth of Learning's Pacific Center for Flexible and Open Learning, is a 5-year MFET project, which is looking at enhancing the capacity and efficiency of education sectors in the region itself. Here, sorry, Just give me a few seconds, my PC is. Here we have a couple of projects which are used to enhance the education sector, and the four which are the one that I've just mentioned from PECFOLD and Commonwealth of Learning with MFET project looks at the response to COVID-19 itself, supporting youth employment, building resilience in the Pacific education system, and building education lessons and insight. So what I mean here is, apart from just providing the tertiary education itself, this project also looks at providing the e-support to other sectors in the region itself. So because of USP's position being a Commonwealth country, like the region has 9 Commonwealth countries, but because there are some countries in the region which are not members of Commonwealth, USP's position makes it much easier to become like the bridge between these USP countries like Cook Islands, as well as the Commonwealth countries. So these projects are looking at the e-support, not just in the tertiary sector itself, but in other areas as well. So we are looking at the NGO sector, the youth employment, TVET projects. So through this current project itself, we are looking at all of these directly or indirectly, looking at or using OER itself. And before that, we also had quite a bit of things that were related to OER, and which means that we have the OER collection, which is part of the partnership that we are looking at here, supposed to be hosting the national OER collection. And we have the syndicate, we have the digital skills for OER, providing teachers with the guidance on how to create digital resources. And again, as I mentioned, it's not just for university, it is for other sectors itself. In order to understand how to use OER, there is a need to actually also empower the teachers so that they have a better understanding of what these are. And that is where we and under PECFOLD come useful, because we teach ODFL courses. We have re-offered quite a few of these courses which help in upskilling the teachers on ODFL. Added on, there is a need to increase the knowledge and skills. And again, we, with the collaboration of PECFOLD, have provided as well as offered the MOOCs. And these are the courses that have been designed for teachers in developing countries, and how basically looking at how to adapt open resources for teaching online. And this something became very, very useful when we realized how much gap we had in the region during the COVID-19 lockdown itself. And we have conducted a longitudinal study, and this showed the participants were generally aware of the OER and positively disposed towards the use of OER in the region. Now, all of these things that I'm mentioning are closely related to the PECFOLD MFET project that we are heavily involved in currently. We also have the open courses, which are with the partnership of with OERU, and also adapting and offering them in the region. The first of these we offered in June, which attracted 502 people in the region. It was offered through Moodle, and that was a platform that was provided by CORE. And we actually adapted, and it was actually provided to the users in the region on how to adapt open courses. And they have been pretty useful for those who are just starting or designing or using OER for their own teaching and learning. So what we have realized that there is a need to reestablish the community, and we are this is something that we have been doing in the past, but the last 2 years have meant that we have not actually physically had that OE week the last 2 years, but we are trying all our best to promote through MOOC, through other sessions, awareness week on the importance of OER, and that had seen also the use of OER in quite a few of the courses at USP itself. In partnership is supporting the development and management of a regional tool, where of course PECFOLD will be basically responsible for hosting the OERs and helping these countries in the projects where they are using OER for their learning and teaching. We had a meeting early last year, which had a look at what was the situation or what was the position of the TED education itself in the region. And that was a time when we found that there are quite a lot of partnership or activities happening in the region. Nearly all of them were involved with OER itself. So here I'm going to just take you through some of the projects which are currently happening or have finished in the region, which look at very similar to the activities and things that we through PECFOLD have been involved with. So we have the Asian Development Bank project, which is again looking at the e-learning resource designing for secondary school science teachers program. And here it is to basically develop the capacity building for teachers on how to use the OER. And it has also assisted in providing the devices to a couple of, like possibly 2 or 3 schools in each of those countries. Again, how to use OER for science teaching. Whole partnership that we have just mentioned, Catalpa is doing one where they are using the phone app. And again, science courses in the region, specifically currently looking at 4 countries, year 10 science teachers, again, e-resource. Then we have the UNDP and UNESCO project, which is looking at the Samoa Language Skills Society Initiative, Lifelong Learning Lab, ICT education. We have the Wakamoana project, and it is supposed to start on the 2nd phase as well, which is again looking at the science as well as literacy. We have the UNICEF project, which has looked at the secondary from preschool to secondary in a couple of countries, again related to digital learning platform, OER, and basically confidence building of learners and teachers. We at USP have an OER policy, which is supposed to be helping our member countries' needs in mind, and some of the things that it explores or expects to be responsible for is encouraging the use of OER in teaching and learning at USP itself, as well as I have mentioned earlier, trying to provide that platform for other countries from preschool to end of this tertiary secondary school itself on how to use OER for their learning. And one thing we have realized that it became more obvious during the lockdown is that we need e-resources, and we need to get the teachers more confident in using this. Another thing is we realized that teachers were not that aware of the various resources which are freely available, and they didn't know where to look for them. So all the various MOOCs, the workshops, the trainings, and the various projects we are currently involved in is in a way encouraging as well as educating the teachers at all levels in the region itself to realize the importance and the availability of these resources. We are responsible in a sense to the region, and we are trying our best to provide that type of the skill which is necessary to help set up that mechanism which is necessary for the creation of OER. And one thing we have realized is that we cannot just bring OER from outside the region and expect teachers to utilize it freely. They really need to develop the skills to adapt it for their own group, for their own country, and for their own level. And that is where we currently are, in a way, more involved in trying to provide the type of support which is necessary, because during the lockdown, we realized what the gap was. And we realized that there is a need to basically provide that support and training necessary. This, I would say, is like infant stages. Of course, the OERs have been used for tertiary learning at university. There are quite a lot of courses in which full textbooks are now OER rather than bought textbooks. It becomes like a question of affordability for many students itself, and OER resources have become very useful. However, we have also realized that OER isn't just supposed to be used for tertiary learning. And during the lockdown, we realized how important it was to basically encourage the teachers, show them where these are, help them adapt it. And that is where the various projects are actually looking at ministries of education level for the various science teachers projects that are happening. And if you have had a look at the various projects, that's what it is doing. So that's the situation of OER in the region.
Okay, perfect. Sorry. I was just letting you know that we were.
That's where I'm going to end. Thank you very much. And I'm free for any questions if there are.
Great. So we've got about a minute and a half for questions. That was fantastic. It was a great overview of both the OER landscape in your context, and in addition to the COVID layer on top of that. We do have a few questions in the chat box. I also have a few, but we'll start with what's in the chat box. So what has been the most beneficial for teachers who started to create OER?
I'm finding it a bit difficult to hear. Can you speak a bit loudly?
Sure.
Is it in the chat?
It is, yeah. So just the first question there. So what was the most, what did teachers find most beneficial when they started creating OER resources?
I think the ability to choose, if A wasn't available, what other options were there for them to actually fall back on, which they didn't have to pay for.
Mm.
And that is where the OERs became very beneficial, especially during the lockdown, when they could not go out or nothing could come into the country. And they were basically confined to their own town or their own country or their own village for that matter. And then whatever resources they could find online. And they realized that the content was aligned to the level, to the learning outcomes, to the student that they had in mind. And it is a bit challenging, especially when you are looking for resources for numeracy and science. Science became a very challenging subject area, I would say. And even during lockdown, there were difficulties because they could not actually conduct labs. They could not actually go to the classroom. They could not actually demonstrate apart from just the practical itself. So the OERs provided them with the plan B or a plan C. We still are doing an evaluation, so it will take a while to find a bit more because most of these things just happened in the last 2 years. But definitely we can see that teachers have started seeing the benefit of it. And each of those projects will eventually do a bit of an evaluation at the end, most likely mid next year, to find out the value of those.
Fantastic. And maybe we can invite you back next year then to hear more about the evaluation of those projects. That was our 15 minutes for our first session. I'll take the questions that we didn't get to and I'll send them out for you to respond to, maybe via a Word document. We can share them with all the attendees later in the week, or we might have time at the end. But in the essence of time, we'll keep moving to our next presenter, who is Wayne McIntosh, and I'll put a link like we did, like Christina did, for our first presenter in the chat, and hand over to Wayne now. Feel free again to keep putting your questions in the chat box. I have started a document where I'll collect them in case we don't get to them. And over to you, Wayne.
I'll be with you in a sec. I'm just figuring out the screen share here. It's an interesting challenge. Zoom doesn't like my additional monitors. Let's see if I can do that.
While Wayne's doing that, we can do an activity. So if you have a think about what you've just heard from our first presenter, and maybe type the one point that you found most interesting in the chat box.
I might actually just say something to bridge the silence in here. And so one of the things, and Rajni, thank you so much for your presentation and for outlining so many things that you're doing. For me, that I've taken away is that localization is extremely important to bring it into the cultural context that you're working, into the institutional context, as well as make it more relevant, rather than just taking something and dumping it on another group of people, because we have seen in the past that that doesn't really work well, and we should not perpetuate that model, but really take into consideration how can we adopt something. And that's, I find, the wonderful thing about OER, that you have that opportunity to remix and use all of these resources and come up with something new that is supposed to be for the context that you're working in. So thank you so much.
All right, I think I've got my screen share working, and I apologize for the short delay there. So I always start, I think this is an important reflection whenever we are talking about open educational resources, and that is to remember that there's no form of educational delivery that is more cost effective, more scalable, or more sustainable than open education. Just by way of background, I work for a nonprofit organization called the OER Foundation that provides governments and institutions with support in implementing the UNESCO OER recommendation. I also think it is important, just going back to the early days of the Cape Town Open Education Declaration, before the UNESCO declaration was adopted, is the fact that OER is not just limited to the educational resources, it also draws upon the open technologies that support it. So today I'm just going to share some of the work we've been doing, and I'm pleased that Rajni was able to introduce the Pacific Partnership for Open Distance Learning, which has been led by the Commonwealth of Learning in partnership with PACFOLD at the University of the South Pacific. And the course screen that you're looking at there is a digital skills for OER sharing, is in fact one of the very first courses we ran in the region as part of this project. And to date, well over 5,000 teachers across the Pacific have engaged in a range of these courses. But when we started out, we surveyed the teachers who engaged in this course and established that more than half of the teachers who had signed up for this course do not, for example, have access to a learning management system. And so you can appreciate the challenges if you're, as a teacher, are wanting to acquire the skills or improve your digital fluencies. It's very important to have access to the technologies to refine your skills. And it's the old notion, you're not going to learn to swim by reading a book, and you need to get your feet wet. And within this context, a little bit of background, we at the OER Foundation use a component-based system that is assembled from best-of-breed free and open source software technologies that are used for designing, developing, and delivering these open courses. But we've also found that given the challenges in the Pacific, that many of our Pacific countries, and remember that for many of the Pacific Islands, these are populations, national populations of under 500,000 people. There are big challenges for individual governments in being able to set up and establish their own technical infrastructure to support locally hosted open online courses. And so what we are doing, and this is a new initiative, we are setting up the FOSTL Commons. And the FOSTL Commons will be a free and open source software digital learning ecosystem that operates as a community garden for educators and institutions to build their skills in hosting these open technologies. A little bit about the environment, so you've got a bit of a sense of what we do and what is possible. We author all content in an open wiki using MediaWiki, the same open source software that powers Wikipedia. And we can take any collection of individual wiki pages and publish them to a responsive WordPress multi-site. So this gives the ability for any country to be able to host a low-cost instance of any open course they want to. In terms of the delivery environment, you can see here all our courses are hosted on a WordPress multi-site, and we use a range of open source technologies for learners to interact with each other. And we have open source scripts that we share publicly that generate live Twitter-like course feeds for learners. For these interactions are syndicated across these different technologies. I'd like to show you just a couple of examples of some of the remix that's been happening around the world. One of our leading courses at the OERU is this course comprising 4 micro courses that is designed, called Learning in a Digital Age, but it's really focused on building digital fluencies for learners entering post-secondary education. One of the courses there you will see is a course on open education, copyright, and open licensing in a digital world. In collaboration with the ICDE, the International Council for Open Distance Education, we took the English version of the course with support from UNESCO head office and developed a localized French version of the course. And part of this development enabled us to develop localizations and the capabilities for localizing the register and enroll plugins that work on this ecosystem to have a French version. So we do have the technologies to enable local Pacific languages to develop custom courses in indigenous languages within the Pacific region. In another example, this is also part of the Pacific Partnership for Open Distance Learning. On the left there, you can see the version of the course that was hosted on the Commonwealth of Learning's infrastructure, the digital skills for OER sharing. That WordPress multi-site portal can be set up for as little as $46 a month. That, based on our server metrics, would easily be able to scale to 10,000 learners with no increase in cost, giving individual Pacific countries the ability to host their own open online courses. Another project that was referenced by Rajni in her presentation was the UNESCO's Samoan Knowledge Society initiative and the Lifelong Learning Lab. The course you're looking at on the right is in fact a Samoan instance of the digital skills for OER sharing running on the Ministry of Education, Science and Culture's own open source infrastructure. So we got working examples of how a postal collaborative, a community garden space could work in enabling individual countries to really benefit from the power of sharing federated versions of courses for supporting learners in their own country. So I'll leave it there and see if there are any questions.
Okay, so we have about 7 minutes for questions. And I'm just bringing up the chat box.
Wayne, I do have a
Yes.
question, if I may. So this is Christina here. Thank you so much for that overview. And of course, open source for the win. What could be any better for that, for bringing that into the conversation of open educational resources. And on one of your early slides, you mentioned that you have that wonderful integration because you're not trying to create new software, but you're trying to integrate existing systems that can do a lot of good stuff already and make them work more easily together. That you have the wiki where you publish the content, then you can take a snapshot and put it on a WordPress site. So I'm wondering, especially looking at potential connectivity issues, could you then also take that snapshot and, for example, put it on a USB stick or so, take it on a boat ride and plug it into a computer at a library that might not be connected to the internet, and then use all of these wonderful resources offline?
So the short answer to that question is yes, you would be able to host a local instance on a local area network of any of these courses. So you would just spin up a local WordPress that runs on the local network. There is, in fact, a very interesting a project that is run by the Commonwealth of Learning called Aptus. So what they using Raspberry Pi, they run a local server that mobile phones can then connect to the local server. So basically any POS application, server-based application could be run locally, so learners wouldn't need to incur any data costs in order to engage with the materials. So yes, it is possible.
Thank you. Fantastic.
And one of the questions from Mutoto in the chat is about the community garden concept that you mentioned. Are you able to tell us the thinking behind the concept and maybe describe how it was operationalized a bit more?
So the Postal Community Garden is a new initiative we're actually just setting up right now. But the concept of a community garden is it's a community space where we can learn together. And likewise, within a community garden, there are community related tasks that need to be carried out. For example, getting rid of or weeding the community garden. So there are tasks that we can collectively share across a wider network in order to look after the garden. But while we are busy planting new seeds, it's an opportunity to acquire new skills. And the concept of a community garden is that technologists who are wanting to improve, for example, their system administration skills in hosting free and open source software, could work with us as part of a team to improve their skills. And once they have developed sufficient confidence to be able to host these technologies themselves, because they are free and open source, they could spin up any one or more of the technology applications that reside within the suite. So that's the idea of a community garden, particularly within the Pacific region where you have small populations. It may not be cost effective to run large enterprise implementations of sophisticated software because there's just not budget to do it. But there it makes sense that because the populations are small, we can actually share a hosted instance of some of the more sophisticated applications while giving individual countries the ability to host some of the less demanding applications themselves, but in a system that's all connected with each other. I mean, I could, for example, maybe I'll just show a quick example here. So here, for example, is the WordPress multi-site. You'll see that this is hosted on the Col domain, on the Col infrastructure. So this is just a standard WordPress site that is kind of functioning like a course portal, if you will. So there are the list of courses, that, have been developed and been hosted on the infrastructure. And because this is open source, any country can create their own instance. So here's the actual course. Let me show you that syndicated course feed I was talking about. So here's a course feed that is, pulling in mentions from, different technologies. Here's a link from the course forum site. Here's a post from the actual course website. We can pull in posts. For those of you that have been watching the Twitter migration to Mastodon, people can also post comments on their own Mastodon instance that would be pulled in here. So sending you greetings from Col. So I'm now on the Col WordPress multi-site, posting a comment here, and you can see that the comment has appeared here on the Col site. If I move across to the website that is hosted, and you'll see this URL, this is a different WordPress multi-site. This is hosted by the Ministry of Education, Sports and Culture in Samoa, but this is their instance of the course, which can be customized. And if I go here to the course feed, you will see here that the mention or the post coming from the Col site is syndicated here also on the Samoan instance of the course. So this opens up very interesting and exciting opportunities for thinking about federated courses that are, connected with learners distributed around the world.
Excellent. Thank you, Wayne. And thank you for going back in to show us those live examples. Any other questions from anybody else in the audience? Did you want to quickly comment on Mastodon?
Mastodon is the future of the internet. So think of social media that is federated. Think of individual institutions, organizations being able to host their own social media platforms for microblogging in ways that can connect with any other instance around the world. You really need to get into this space. And if you're interested in having a play, the Fostel, social.fostel is a vanilla instance of Mastodon that's just been set up for this platform cooperative. You really need to be in this space because we can take back control of the internet the way it was designed to be. So come and join us and help save the internet.
And for those of you that have been following the news stories, I think Elon Musk is a big driver of getting people off of Twitter and into Mastodon over the last week. So there's plenty to read about it at the moment. Moving on to our final speaker, I will just quickly check the waiting room as well. We're going to hand over to Jennifer Hurley, and she's going to speak to us about a specific example of open education in practice with the examples of open textbook publishing at RMIT. So handing over to her now.
Thank you, Dawn. I won't share my video, my face now just because of bandwidth, but I will do so when question time comes. So I'll just share my slides with you. So Thank you so much for having me. I'm Jen Hurley and I'm a librarian at RMIT University in Melbourne, Australia, and I lead the RMIT Open Publishing team. And so we publish open books under the imprint of RMIT Open Press. And what I want to do in the next maybe 10 minutes or so is just, I was going to go into a bit of depth about best practice definitions of open education, but I feel like I would already be preaching to the converted. So I will just touch on the definitions in relation to how we use them at RMIT to support the activities that we want to do in terms of open education and open publishing. And when we're advocating for open education to our academics and wider RMIT community, we go back to the underlying definition and the principles of open education to show the benefits of open education, to talk to people who aren't familiar with the concepts. I'll talk a little bit about the key elements of open education in terms of how we apply them at RMIT. I'll give you a couple of examples, and then I'll talk about a little bit again about where to next. And I really love the idea of the community garden, because I just wanted to mention a few ways in which we can all engage with each other and develop a community of practice. So just very briefly again, in terms of open education defined, and I'll have links, once these slides are shared, you'll have links to the resources that I've used. So essentially, open access is a social justice movement. That's how we treat it here at RMIT. I'm sure you do as well. So all the things that that have already been spoken about by Rajni and Wayne around access to resources, to remove the barriers to access, such as cost, also technology. And I'm really mindful of that is an issue in the areas that you have been talking about, less so in Australia. And I do feel that we are really fortunate that isn't such an issue here, but I am very mindful of that, and as are other people in the open education community. It's also strongly around equity of access. So the resources that we create, do they speak to a diverse range of people, are a diverse range of people involved in the creation of open resources, and also leads to participation. So educators and students participating in the creation of resources. And also we treat it as a human right. So access to quality education is a human right. And so that's the foundation for us. And essentially, the more I talk about this open education to people, the more, I just want to say it's about freedom. And so if we look at UNESCO's definition or goal in relation to open education, they say that everyone should have the freedom to use, customise, improve and redistribute educational resources without constraint. I would possibly argue that it is all about freedom, but careful freedom. So careful in how we use things and how we share things. And so in this way, in implementing open education in teaching practices that I have seen at RMIT and at other universities, it's been shown that these activities can transform practices for teachers and learning experiences for students. So students shift from being the consumers of knowledge to the creators of knowledge, and then their teachers are more there for validating what they've learnt rather than being, the source of all knowledge. And so just in terms of the ecosystem, I'm sorry that I've just realised that slide's gone a bit wonky with my screen, but I'll talk to these anyway. And so, and again, the things that I'm talking about here are reflected definitely in what Rajni and Wayne have spoken about. So if you think of open education as that broader education ecosystem, and then to support that requires open access. So we need material that is discoverable, and it needs to be free, and then also that's where that technology comes in as well. Do we have the technology to support finding those resources? So for example, at RMIT, we're using Figshare to store non-traditional research outputs that anyone can access. We also need those OER platforms that Rajni and Wayne were talking about. So I'll just use the example of a large meta database, Mason OER MetaFinder. There are lots of other ones as well. There's also a growing within the community that I am part of, that there is a growing number of university presses. So at RMIT, we use the Pressbooks platform, which is based on WordPress, and our publishing imprint is called RMIT Open Press, and I've linked through to that, and if you wanted to explore that, you could see the books that we've published in the last 18 months. So that's discoverability. It also involves open licenses that I'm sure most of you, if not all of you, are completely aware of, but we need to know that we can create a resource that is going to be reusable by others, that they can use it in a manner that works for their context. So rather than just being able to access a textbook for free, you can pick it up and adapt it for your local context. And so that is really important. And there are, Rajni was talking about education or professional development for educators. One of the big issues that we have here at RMIT is getting people, academics, to understand these licenses and how they can use Creative Commons licensed works, but also if they're creating their own work, what is the impact of a Creative Commons license? Does it meet their expectations of how they can share their work? So that it's not a completely straightforward issue. Also, another big one that is not lost on this audience is that we need supportive institutions to enable educators to have that space, and it does require space and resources to be innovative, to be willing to change practices. So it can be a complete transformation of what they're doing, and that is happening at RMIT. It takes time and learning and upskilling. How do those academics, how are they supported? So a couple of things that we've got on the boil at RMIT. So the Open Publishing team, which I've already mentioned. So in addition to supporting RMIT authors to publish open books, we also support them in terms of delivering, for example, sessions on Creative Commons or copyright or the Pressbooks platform, so that they're upskilled in using that themselves, empowered to start creating OERs. Another really key thing at the moment is the RMIT Open Scholarship Policy Project. So that's being led by senior people within the library, but it's a cross RMIT project to develop an open scholarship policy that includes open education and open research. So that's, from what we have discovered, that's reasonably rare to have both aspects of open in one policy, but part of that, as part of that project, we are lobbying for RMIT to support educators in their practices. And so in terms of how these practices have played out at RMIT, so how do we support free sharing of knowledge and upskilling and student participation and collaboration, all of that diversity. Here's just a couple of examples, and again, I've embedded links so you can have a look at them yourself as well. And please feel free to, I've got my email or the team's email there, so feel free to email us if you've got questions after today. I'd love to hear from you. And so the OER capability toolkit, freely available for anyone to pick up and use. It was designed, so Rajni mentioned the need for upskilling academics. We also found that at RMIT that educators did not understand the OER ecosystem, and so we developed this book for them. We developed it for professional staff as well, including library staff. If we were going to be working in this space, we needed to understand it as well. And it was also partly a promotional exercise or awareness raising rather exercise. And so we're talking maybe 2 years ago when we were first thinking about doing this. Things have changed a lot in those last couple of years, and people are far more aware, but we find that it is still needed. So we share this, with anyone interested in OER at all. And so in addition to sort of upskilling academics, it's also an example of collaboration between a range of authors. So these were all people within the library co-developing this resource, taking on a chapter each. It was reviewed within the library, and it was also externally reviewed, and all of those reviewers have been acknowledged within the book. And so that we're supporting that process of open peer review, hopefully for others to pick up and follow on. So it's again transformative. It's nothing like the traditional double-blind peer review process of commercial publishers. This is all open. The authors can communicate directly with the reviewers. We could put reviewers' content in there if we wanted to. So just completely opening up the whole system. And the other one I wanted to mention was this book, Partnerships with the Community. This was a social work book developed or written during COVID, as the title says, and it involved the 3 editors who are academics. It involved 4 Masters of Social Work students, and then a range of work integrated learning partners, so external to RMIT. And so it was collaborations between them. There's also a collaboration between RMIT Library and Informant, who is a commercial publisher, also branching out into some open publishing. It also really interestingly was involved
Jennifer,
yeah,
I might just get you to wrap up.
I will, yeah.
We're at
Okay.
our 15-minute mark.
Yeah, sure. Okay. So this one involved a non-disposable assessment in that students contributed to the book and their work was assessed. And I will leave this. I've got a last slide about how we can all get together, and that, that's ultimately my intention is that I can meet like-minded people and we can grow that garden. So that's me. Thank you. I'll just stop sharing.
Fantastic. I might make one quick request. If everybody sends their slides, we can share them with everybody that attended today. I've also captured the questions from the chat box, and anything that went unanswered, we'll get the speakers today to answer and send out to the audience. We do have 3 minutes left, so I will open up the forum for questions for Jennifer. But also, if there's a question that you wanted to ask of another speaker at this time, we can use it for that as well. So one question from the chat box from Wayne: if you were to set up an open textbook initiative again, what would you do differently?
I'd have it all very neatly planned from the get-go, Wayne, with procedures written and ready, you know, set up to go. It's been very much a learning process. Yeah, I think if that was ever possible, you know, or, of course not, but yeah, it would make things a lot easier. So, but I think anyone doing it, my advice is talk to other people who have done it recently.
And maybe we'll open up this question to the whole group. And I think I just noting on what Jennifer said about talking to others, we keep coming back to that idea of a community garden, and it's such an appropriate analogy for this space. So thank you for sharing that with us, Wayne. So I think all three people spoke to the skills necessary to create OER, the skills necessary to utilize OER, and the skills necessary to host OERs. Are there any final comments from any of the speakers in regards to those different skills and how as a global community we can help each other to upskill in those spaces? Or maybe that's the question that we all take away from this session, to have not just to think about on your own, but maybe talk to a colleague about that, or reach out to somebody from today's session and to have that conversation. So it's 12 on the dot. And just wanted to return to, you know, this is an event for APOD Week, which is hosted by both FLANZ, the Flexible Learning Association of New Zealand, in association with the International Council for Open and Distance Education, ICODE, and along with UDLA, the Open Distance Learning Association of Australia. I hope I've gotten all those correct. And I think we had an excellent turnout. At one point we got up to 19 of our 21 people that signed up for the presentation. So excellent sharing of experiences and resources from 3 distinct areas. I think we had a really rich area of content to talk about and showcase with one another. So massive applause to all 3 of our speakers today. If you want to come off mute and clap for them. And we'll be following up then with you this week or the next. And if there's any other questions that anybody has for anybody, you can also feel free to send them through to our group. Thanks everyone, and have a great rest of your week.
And thank you also to you, Dawn, for moderating today's session.
Yes.
Last in the APOD Week. Thank you.
Well, thanks. You're quick with the links. Thank you for getting all those resources in as people were speaking. That was fantastic.
Have a
Thank
good
you
day,
both.
everybody.
Take care.
Yes.